Good morning. I'm so glad you're here with us today. Today we're wrapping up our series, Answering the Call. And as you may remember, our focus in this series is on being effective in times of change. And this is an issue that's really important for all of us. It's important for our church. It's important for you as an individual. But honestly, with so much change going on around us, it's really important for everything and everyone. Businesses, everyone is dealing with this change that's going on around us because we are living in a time of significant change. I mean, for the past several decades, things have been changing really quickly with more and more stuff going on online, more and more computerized. And now with the pandemic here, all those changes that have been occurring over these past few decades are being accelerated. So there's no doubt that every aspect of our lives has been impacted by change and really accelerating change. So as you recall, last week, what we talked about was that during times of change, particularly times of significant change, we can't keep doing what we've always done because it's not going to be an effective solution. If the world around us is changing, we need to respond to that. We need to be effective in the light of these changes. So what we mentioned last week is that, as a church, there are some things that are really a foundation of who we are, that we are going to continue to embrace our existing traditions. And the mission of our church is unchanged. Our mission is to share the love of God with the people around us and to share the message of Jesus. So our mission is unchanged, but our methods need to change. We need to be willing to change the way we engage with this world around us because the world itself is changing so much. And something that I've noticed over time is that whenever we're venturing out to do something new, and again, whether that's a business, as an individual, as a church, as we start to do something new, as we start to try to adapt, in general, the greatest issue we face is being too timid. That we want to try to make small changes to adapt, but in a time where there's significant change going on, small changes in terms of adapting to those bigger changes is just not going to work. So what we need to be willing to do, and I think the way to be successful at a time like this, is to be bold. Now, being bold does not mean being reckless. We're, of course, going to have a plan. The thing we want to keep in mind, though, is that as we put together a plan, that plan doesn't have to be perfect. There's an old saying that goes something like this: a good plan today is better than a great plan tomorrow. And I would take that another step, that a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. So this week we've titled our message, An Imperfect Plan. Now, of course, the reality is that there is no perfect plan. I mean, once any plan gets underway, if you're dealing with a complex situation, once that plan gets underway, things will have to start to change. Because in any complex scenario, it's not possible to know everything that's going to come up. And if you're dealing with people, and you're dealing with interactions between people, you're dealing with interactions in the society around us, that is a complex situation where there is no way to know everything that could possibly come up. So we're going to need to change and adapt our plan over time. The key thing is that we have to start out with a vision. And we have to start out with a desired destination. So we want to paint a big picture of what it is we're trying to achieve. We want to understand what our desired outcome is in the end. And then we will make a plan to get there. But the thing we need to avoid is excessive planning. There's a phrase that you've probably heard before, which is analysis paralysis. And that's the situation that comes up where you're trying to put together a plan and you start examining the situation and you just keep looking at what might happen and what might go on, and you try to perfectly plan everything all the way out, all the way through, and you spend so much time analyzing the situation that you're never able to move forward. And it's so important that we avoid that problem. Now, if you're setting out to build a nuclear plant, yeah, you want to make sure you understand every single thing that might happen along the way. But when we're talking about people interacting and connecting and developing relationships, it's not possible to know every single thing that might happen. So we build a plan, but we understand that we can't know everything. So what we need to do is be bold. We need to be willing to take risks. And I would encourage this to be true for you in your decisions in your life as you adapt to things around you. Be bold, be willing to take risks, and be willing to be wrong. Because when we're willing to be wrong, that's when we get to learn. And being willing to be wrong gives us the freedom to take chances. And the thing that's really kind of neat is that as things go wrong, and we deal with those things that might go wrong, and we learn from those, something really amazing happens. Is that it gives us the freedom to end up where we actually belong. Not be so focused on where we think we belong that we miss where we actually belong. And that occurs by being willing to be wrong and adapt as you go along. And something I've noticed is that as people, we have this tendency to say, I'm starting at one place, and as I make a plan for a destination, I expect that trip to occur in a perfectly straight line. And as you're planning your life, that's just not how life works. That path, that road from your starting point to your destination tends to be much more winding. And I'm convinced that that's actually how life is supposed to work. And that when we have this willingness to wind through the challenges and have different experiences as we work our way towards our destination, that's what causes us to land. That's what causes us to land in the right place. That's what causes us to actually end up where we actually belong. Because what happens is that as the circumstances push us off of our expected path, that's when we grow, right? Because it's in those struggles and it's in those challenges, and it's that willingness to engage in those struggles and challenges along the journey. That's when we start to learn, right? That's when we start to understand that there's more going on than we could know. And that's when we start to grow as individuals, and that's how we start to grow as a church. And the other thing I notice is that as we wind from side to side, as the situation pushes us off that straight line, we start to meet people. And we may meet people who are going through things that we didn't even know were happening. And as we interact with those people can often help us grow by what we learn from those people. And as we interact with those people, we can actually start to help them. And we can start to be a more positive influence in their life. And we start to have all these experiences, and we start to grow in all these ways that are only possible when we get pushed off of that straight line and we're willing to struggle through the challenges of that winding journey. And that has certainly been true in my life. I mean, if I go back, just these past 20 years, 20 years ago, as Bonnie and I moved to New Hampshire, and we launched our business, we had a plan, and it was a pretty good plan. I mean, we'd set aside money knowing it would take time to get things started. We had laid out multiple aspects of our business that our goal was to be a consulting organization, but we knew it takes time to build that up. So we made a relationship with another company to do training, so that would be more of a steady income as we started to work through. And we started to lay this plan out. We started to engage in this plan. And then just over a year and a half after we start, the 9/11 attacks happen. And all consulting stops. And all training stops. And there was no way to really engage with new business. And there weren't even people hiring to go out and do things. And that was just the beginning. Now, we got through that. But over those next 20 years, there were lots of challenges and lots of plans that were made that didn't work out well. Some things went well, some things didn't. Some things we thought were not going to be very important became very important in our lives. And that went on over those decades. And you guys have heard me talk before about just various challenges that we've encountered. And the thing that was kind of interesting to me, or the thing that is interesting to me, is that it's in those challenges where we start to change and we start to grow. And I'll tell you that there were times where we thought we were not going to make it as a business, that we were going to have to close the doors. I mean, there was one time that we gave ourselves one more week. If we can't turn something around by the end of this week, we've just got to start fresh outside the business. And it was in some of those times where we felt stuck in a hole and we just didn't know what to do, that we started to look for other answers. And it's in those times of those challenges that we began to turn to God and develop a relationship with God and understand that there was this personal engagement that could happen with God. And, you know, as you dig into that relationship and as you dig into that just conversation with God, you start to grow. And in our case, our eyes began to open to the fact that there was much more going on in the world around us than we understood. And in that, it started to help us understand that there were more important things going on than just what we were focused on in our own business. And then what I discovered is that through that process and that engagement with God and that growth that occurs in this relationship with God, is that we began to get more successful within our business, but at the same time, we started to engage in other aspects of life. And through that process, we ultimately got into prison ministry and spent time in prison ministry, which then led to here. And so our plan that we started a little over 20 years ago proved to be a quite imperfect plan. But I am certain that it has put us and it has put me right where we're supposed to be, which is right here. And as I reflect on all that, and I start to think about our lives and what's going on, something kind of occurred to me, which is that I am not perfect. Now, I recognize that is not a surprise to any of you, right? But I am not perfect, and I think we would all agree that this world is not perfect. So why would I expect a perfect plan to be the right way for an imperfect person to succeed in an imperfect world? Because if all the pieces are imperfect, the plans themselves are automatically imperfect. So it's important to accept that. And the thing is that this idea that imperfect plans lead to good outcomes is actually fundamental to being human. In fact, we see it a lot in those first century Jesus followers. If we look at the first century Jesus followers, they had what they thought was the perfect plan. Remember last week as we talked about. So we looked at the book of Acts. Those first century Jesus followers had a plan. And do you remember what it was? Right? Their plan was that because they were Jewish and that all the prophecies about Jesus coming were Jewish, Jesus had been Jewish, the plan was to share the message of Jesus only with other Jews, right? Their Jewish peers. That was their plan. And initially they had success. If we look at the book of Acts, some of those early messages that they shared impacted thousands of lives. So it seemed like it was a really good plan. But then as time went on, their peers, the ones that they thought would actually get it, the ones they thought would be really open to hearing the message of Jesus, fewer and fewer of them were interested. And as time went on, their peers actually started to become hostile towards them. Not only did their peers not want to hear the message of Jesus, their peers didn't want that message shared with anyone. So this was not the plan that those first Jesus followers expected. But when that plan proved imperfect, what did it cause to happen? Well, those Jesus followers left the city where they were located. They had all mostly been located in Jerusalem. Well, as they were proving unsuccessful in Jerusalem, they began to spread out. And as they moved further and further from Jerusalem, they took that message of Jesus with them. And before long, the message of Jesus was being spread far and wide. and far beyond just their peers that they had grown up with. It was being spread with the world at large as it spread further and further out. And so those difficulties that they had encountered, caused them to go where they should go, not where they planned to go. And the book of Acts tells us about one guy in particular who had a plan that didn't go at all like he expected. And that's the Apostle Paul. Because if you've been around church for a while, you know that the Apostle Paul's plan was to actually stop the message of Jesus. Paul did not believe that Jesus was who he said he was. So Paul was dedicated to stopping that message from getting around. And he had a plan, and he had a really good plan. He had a really well-organized plan. He had the support of some of the highest leaders in the region. He was well-funded. He had letters that gave him the authority to arrest people who were actually following this message of Jesus and who were sharing it. He actually had people with him. He had support. So he had a really good plan. And he actually even knew exactly where he wanted to go. He was going to a city named Damascus because the message of Jesus was really starting to get a lot of traction in Damascus. So he was going to go there to stop that message. But along the way, he had an encounter that changed his life, that changed everything. And that plan he had to stop the message of Jesus caused him to make a new plan because he became a Jesus follower himself. So he put together a new plan on how he would share the message of Jesus, and he had a plan for the places he would go to do that. But that plan also ran into difficulties. I mean, incredible difficulties. Being on ships that are sinking, running for his life sometimes, being in places that were hostile towards him. All these things that interfered with the plan going the way he expected it to. But because of all those difficulties, ultimately, he started writing letters to a number of different churches around the region. Those letters became part of what we call the New Testament. So his plan didn't play out exactly as he expected. Instead, he became probably the most influential person in the New Testament other than Jesus himself. And the thing is that even in Paul's ministry, even before most of these difficulties happened, Paul recognized that our plans couldn't be perfect. In fact, he recognized our plans didn't even need to be perfect. What Paul told us is, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to God's purpose for them. So what Paul is telling us is that we need to trust in that larger vision. And most importantly, we need to trust in God. Paul tells us that we do want to plan for a destination, and we want to do the best we can to achieve that destination. But imperfect plans can have amazing outcomes. Because he tells us that everything will work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to God's purpose for them. And my friends, please embrace this truth that God has called you to a purpose. There is a plan for your life. You may not know what it is. I mean, I didn't know what the plan for my life was for most of it. But I can tell you that I do now, at 55 years old. For the first time in my life, I understand that my purpose is to be right here as part of this church family. Now, there are other things that we're planning and other parts of my purpose I don't understand, but I know that as a certainty. And I also know as a certainty that God has a purpose for your life. Maybe you already know what it is. Maybe you don't know yet. Either way, it's okay. And either way, embrace God's presence in your life and make the best plan that you can. I mean, that's what we'll be doing as a church as we go forward. We know that we are living in changing times. And no one knows exactly what to do. There is no church out there that knows exactly how to deal with the changes that are happening because of the pandemic. We do know that churches and church engagement in the world around us is being deeply affected. We know that churches are struggling in many cases to be effective. But there is a way forward, and I believe that God will show us the way through that. And one thing I know for certain, we are going to be bold as we lay out our plans. And we are going to be willing to be wrong sometimes. We know before we even start that we are going to be making an imperfect plan. And we're going to do the best we can, and then we're going to trust that God will bring it all together. And I encourage you to do the same thing in your life. Find your purpose. Whether you are younger or you are older, you have a purpose. You know, I remember so clearly watching this video of Billy Graham on his 99th birthday. Billy Graham, the man who had been such a powerful speaker, such a powerful man of God for decades, on his 99th birthday, his body is not as strong as it once was at that point. His speaking is not as powerful as it once was. But his purpose was abundantly clear. And he was focused on sharing the love of God and the message of Jesus, even as he was aging. And he was doing incredible things, even as his body was aging. He continued to embrace his purpose. So, as you go forward in your life, I encourage you to reach out to God. Ask God to show you the purpose for your life. And see, and here's the thing that's really cool about all this is that, you know, you might get your purpose wrong at first. You know, you might get the path wrong at first. You might get the plan wrong at first. You might even get it all wrong for a while. But that's okay. Because it's in the seeking that we find our way. It's in the seeking that we find our purpose. It's in that seeking that we find our destination. And my friends, that first step is the willingness to not be timid, to not let fear stop us, that willingness to be bold. Because God encourages us to be bold. He tells us, "This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." That command to be courageous, appears in the Bible more than 100 times. So God is calling us to bold plans. And He's even giving us permission to make mistakes, to fail along the way. Notice that it says, "Do not be afraid or discouraged." In other words, God is letting us know that things are going to go wrong sometimes. And that's okay. I mean, honestly, if they don't go wrong sometimes, we're not being bold enough. And He also tells us that discouraging things are going to happen. But when those things happen, don't let them discourage you. If everything goes right all the time, we are not dreaming big enough. My friends, there is a purpose for your life. And the mistakes that you make in your life help to strengthen you for your purpose. Embrace your mistakes, your experiences, your mistakes, the way you work through those mistakes. As we fall down, when we get back up, the combination of those things in your life make you uniquely you. They enable you to do what no one else will be able to do. Embrace all of those. The mistakes are part of the way. They are part of who make us who we are. Embrace them. Go forward. You can do things that no one else will do. My friends, be willing to be bold. Step out and be willing to do what no one else is willing to do. Be willing to answer God's call on your life boldly. And when we do, our imperfect plans will put us in position to do just what we've been called to do, even if we're not sure what that thing is yet. Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I am grateful for your calling on all of our lives. I am grateful for your encouragement to be bold. And we embrace this truth, Lord, that our mistakes are what help us to become who we are meant to be. Lord, so I pray for our whole family, for everyone watching this, Lord, that we not be discouraged, that we embrace what you bring into our lives, Lord. Being willing to be bold, be willing to be wrong, recognizing that making mistakes along the way is not failure. It's simply the path. Lord, so we embrace that path. I pray for your covering over each one of us as we step out to do as you call us to do. I pray for our church, Lord, that we would see your leading, that we would be in step with you as you build your church. Lord, and I pray that we would step out boldly to share your love, the message of Jesus with this world around us, embracing the healing and gifts you've given us in our lives and sharing that love and purpose with the world around us. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.